Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Brothers and sisters in Islam, in light of the now famous video and confrontation between brother Daniel haqiqatjou and Suhaib Webb, and the aftermath of that confrontation and that video, and all the discussions and the commentary and the reaction that has been happening. So basically, if you're not aware, brother Daniel haqiqatjou has a channel called Muslim Skeptic, and he does a lot of good da'wah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aid his work and his da'wah and all the good that he's doing on that channel. And one of the things that he does is he tries to warn the Muslims about threats to their deen. So when he sees problematic ideas being pushed by so-called Imams and scholars, and sometimes deviant ideas, he reacts and criticizes these Imams and these so-called scholars for the problematic issues they are pushing upon the ummah. And this is critical and fundamental work. So this was why that confrontation happened between brother Daniel and Suhaib Webb, because brother Daniel was facing Suhaib Webb after Suhaib Webb challenged him on some problematic post that Suhaib Webb posted online. And so there's been, as I said, a lot of commentary and reaction to this confrontation. And Yasir Qadhi put up a post in the aftermath of all of this, a long post, and he basically put forth certain positions that I want to look at and react to, inshallah. And so if you look at Yasir Qadhi's post, it's a long post, but basically, just to look at the opening of it, he says scholars are humans. People who have trained in Islamic sciences, whatever level they are upon in their chosen specialties, should be respected for their dedication and knowledge. If that knowledge is combined with personal piety, no doubt such people are the inheritors of the prophets in our times. This does not, however, make them infallible, and as humans, they will make choices and form opinions that will be incorrect. So basically, if you read the whole post, it's a long post, the argument that he presents forth, and this is a common thing, and this is a common argument in the aftermath of this confrontation between brother Daniel haqiqatjou and Suhaib Webb, is that look, the Imams, we cannot attack scholars and Imams because of their position in Islam and the respect Islam tells us to have towards ulama and Imams. And we don't want to destroy that position in the eyes of the Muslims because they'll lose confidence in their Imams. And so these Imams, what it's basically saying is that, like Suhaib Webb, they've dedicated their whole lives to Islam, and other scholars like him, Umar Sulaiman, and so on and so forth, they've dedicated their lives to learning Islam and Islamic sciences. And if they make some mistakes, then we should overlook their mistakes. Why? Because they've performed so much good, and their good far outweighs any bad or any mistakes that they've made. And he gives an analogy in this post. Basically what he says is that, look, to give an example, to push forth this narrative of his that we should overlook the mistakes of the Imams because they're doing so much good. He says, when I was at Medina University, I came across some views, and one of these views he came across is that scholars hold the view that the earth is stationary and the sun and the moon and the other bodies, they actually orbit around the earth. And he said scholars in our past have held this view, and modern scholars such Ibn Baz and Ibn Uthaymeen, they've held this view. And so he says now we know conclusively, according to modern science and modern knowledge, is that in actual fact, it is the earth and the moon that orbit and the other planets that orbit around the sun. So he says these scholars, in his eyes, they were mistaken in this view, but are we going to destroy and ignore all the good that they've done because of some problematic views or mistakes that they've made? So he says in the end, scholars will make some mistakes, but their good far outweighs the bad. Okay, this analogy is fundamentally wrong and very problematic from many angles. This example that he gave about the sun and who orbits, does the earth orbit the sun or does the sun orbit the earth? First of all, this is not an issue of deen. So this is an issue of reality, of science, of knowledge, of worldly knowledge. In the end, who cares if they made a mistake on this issue? Who cares if modern science proves conclusively something else in people's views? It doesn't really matter, because this is not a creedal issue. It's not a thing that affects your aqidah. It's not a thing that changes your iman. It doesn't change anything of the things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked us to believe in. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to question you on the day of judgment whether the earth orbits the sun or the sun orbits the moon. So if they were mistaken in this issue, in your view, then of course we can overlook this mistake and we're not going to ignore all the good that they did, because this is not a mistake that is in the fundamentals of Islam. But to compare that to celebrity sheikhs such as Suhaib Webb, who are endorsing fahisha, munkar, who are endorsing singers taking selfies with Drake at concerts, endorsing Lupe Fiasco, endorsing and encouraging people to listen to his uncensored album, and the link to the Playboy magazine and the other women that he mentioned that have very problematic kufr views and LGBT leanings. This is not analogous to that. They completely have nothing to do with each other. The example of Suhaib Webb, these are not shortcomings or mistakes you can overlook, because they are in the fundamental aspects of Islam. So this argument, and you see this many times in comments, brothers and sisters will comment, such as this comment here, where this person says, Alhamdulillah, I benefit so much from Yasir Qadhi and Umar Sulaiman, and there is nothing on the planet that will force me to ridicule and dismiss and lie against them. And he basically continues to say that why there's so many videos of them, why is there so much criticism, their good far outweighs the bad. And so this is the common reaction that we are hearing. Don't attack the position of the ulama, and if they make some mistakes, their good far outweighs the bad. And I say to this, actually, their harm far outweighs the good. The harm of these so-called celebrity sheikhs, celebrity imams, influencer imams, their actual harm far outweighs any good that they're doing. And inshallah, in the video, I'll explain why. First of all, I want to make something clear. Just because you criticize some so-called ulama for mistakes and problematic views and sometimes deviant views, it doesn't mean you are attacking the status of ulama in Islam, or the legitimacy of ulama, or the position that the ulama should be held in. It means nothing like that at all. In reality, we know the position of the ulama in Islam, and we respect the ulama. But what kind of ulama? The ulama that have knowledge and they have taqwa, fear of Allah. The ulama that clarify the issues for the ummah. The ulama in our time that see the liberal, secular, feminist attacks on Islam. They resist these attacks. They clarify to the Muslims that these are kufr ideologies, that you cannot mix them in Islam, you cannot moderate Islam, you cannot reform Islam. That clarify the issues of LGBT, that don't try and ally with the LGBT. Ulama, when they see the issues of the ummah such as Palestine, such as the oppression and invasion of the Muslim lands and the Muslims in Afghanistan, they stand up and speak the truth against the tyrants, against the invasion of the liberal secular ideas in the Muslim lands. Those ulama that are deplatformed, that they close down their masjids, they stop them from teaching. There's ulama that are threatened with jail, their livelihood is threatened. They are imprisoned and tortured, and there are thousands, and we hear the stories, thousands of ulama that are standing up against what is happening to the Muslim ummah. These ulama, absolutely, we support them, we respect them. And if they've made some mistakes in the issues of ijtihad or some fatwas or some minor issues, then absolutely we'll overlook those minor issues because of the greater good that they are doing. They are clarifying Islam, they are upholding the truth of Islam, the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These ulama, will hold them in high esteem, we will encourage the ummah to follow them, and we do not attack them, and we can overlook their shortcomings because of their greater good. But the ulama that are celebrity sheikhs, that are celebrity speakers, that are influencers, the ulama that accept the status quo, The ulama that see the attacks of liberalism and secularism, and they're trying to modernize Islam. They're trying to secularize Islam, liberalize, feminize Islam. The ulama that put doubts on the Quran. The ulama that push interfaith dialogue, that push the Abrahamic religion initiative. The ulama that are so friendly with priests and rabbis and hold them as the friends, and they push initiatives with them. These kinds of ulama that cannot clarify and confuse the Muslims when it comes to LGBT issues, and that call to ally with LGBT for the sake of Muslim rights. These ulama that are pushing these problematic things, that are modernizing, secularizing, seeking to reform Islam, that think the Sharia is barbaric and medieval, that think that we need to update Islam to fit in line with modern times, that are changing the very foundations of Islam and practices of Muslims, then these ulama, we cannot merely overlook these mistakes. And these types of ulama, their harm far outweighs any good that they are doing. And let me be clear, we're not denying that these kinds of sheikhs, Yasir Qadhi and Umar Sulaiman and Mufti Mank and Suhaib Webb and their like, they might have affected some individuals. They might have brought some people closer to Islam. They might have brought some people closer to the Quran. They might have, people have become Muslims at their hands. We're not denying any of this. But if you look at the bigger picture and the trend in the youth, specifically Muslims in the West in the last 20, 30 years, if you look at the bigger picture, the harms far outweigh any benefit. Why? Because they are entrenching secularism. They are normalizing kufr. They are normalizing LGBT. They are more normalizing feminist ideas in Islam. They are normalizing the modernist, reformist approach to change the foundations of Islam, to change the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where you have a whole new generation of Muslims that, yes, they might pray and fast and they perform some aspects of their religion, such as the morals. But in essence, in their practices, in their outlook, they become secular, liberal, feminist Muslims. And this is all because of the work of these so-called ulama, because they've entrenched the idea of secularism and liberalism in the minds of the Muslims. They're helping, whether knowingly or unknowingly, the agenda of the kuffar has been highlighted many times by the Rand corporations to modernize and secularize and liberalize Islam, an Islam that the West is happy with. So these types of ulama, their harm far outweighs any good that they've done. So when I say that these types of celebrity sheikhs and celebrity influencers and public speakers, that their harms far outweigh their good, why is the case? How can we exactly picture and understand what happens when the Muslims are faced with kufr ideas, kufr ideologies, and the ulama don't resist these ideas and they don't clarify for the Muslims, but they allow these ideas to be entrenched amongst the Muslims? What is the outcome, and how can we get a clear picture of this? And to give you a perfect example, that is the example of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. This is such a deep example, and his example, his stand is a lesson for the ummah for all times about the righteous ulama and the celebrity or corrupt ulama. So if you go back 1,000 years to the time of Imam Ahmad, at that time we had the Khilafah system, Islamic governments, and you had the Khilafah of Al-Abbasiyun. And basically at that time, about 300 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, a group appeared amongst the ummah called the Mu'tazila. And the Mu'tazila started introducing some strange ideas amongst the Muslims. They started discussing philosophical issues about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about the essence of Allah. And there was really a statement that encapsulated everything they wanted to say and their ideas. And that statement was, they said that the Quran is the creation of Allah, not the kalam, not the speech of Allah. And this was an idea the Muslims had never heard at that time, to say the Quran is a creation of Allah. Everyone understood that the Quran, it's the words of Allah, kalamullah. So this group, again, according to their rationale, they said, if we say the Quran, it's the speech of Allah, the kalam of Allah, that means we're saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks. How can there be speech if you don't talk? And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks, that means he has a mouth. And if he has a mouth, that means he makes sounds. And if we say all of that, that means we're attributing human qualities to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they said, this is kufr. This is the dangers of philosophy. So this is their logic. So they said, no, we can't say any of this. So we're going to say the Quran is the creation of Allah. So the Khalifa at that time, he was impressed by their arguments and he adopted their views, and he wanted to take these views and enforce them on the Muslims at that time. And to show you the importance of the ulama and the role of the ulama. So you see, when he had the idea to enforce these views on the Muslims, he didn't gather all the average Muslims and force them to accept and believe in this, that the Quran is the creation of Allah. What did he do? He went to the scholars, because he knew in the eyes of the common people, the scholars, they are the inheritors of the Prophet. They speak the truth, they understand the deen, that they are what we look to for guidance. So he's thinking, if the scholars accept it, the rest of the Muslims will accept it. So he told his police chief and his authorities, go and gather all the ulama, and I want them to accept and say this, that the Quran is the creation of Allah. And so they went and gathered all the prominent ulama, and until one by one, the ulama, all of them started to say the Quran is the creation of Allah. Why? Because they were threatened with imprisonment, they were threatened with torture, they were threatened with consequences. So one by one, all the prominent ulama, they started to say the Quran is the creation of Allah. That the only last imam and scholar and prominent person that was left was Imam Ahmad. He said, Al-Quran, kalamullah, ghayru makhluk. The Quran is the words of Allah, it is not created. So when he was stubborn on this statement, he refused to give in, even after he was threatened. He was then taken to the Khalifa. And the Khalifa again asked him, what do you say about the Quran? And he kept insisting, the Quran, it's kalamullah, the speech of Allah. It's not created, it's not a creation of Allah. The Khalifa threatened him with torture and imprisonment, and Imam Ahmad insisted. So they imprisoned him, they tortured him over many, many months. And the case became so popular and so widespread that all the Muslims every day would gather on the streets every day as Imam Ahmad is being tested and questioned to see what Imam Ahmad gonna say, because he was the final stand on this issue. Everybody else had buckled to the pressure. So after months of imprisonment and torture, Imam Ahmad remained staunch. And now the Muslims, they were growing in confidence, they were getting angry. You have to release the Imam, and they were backing him for taking this stance against this corrupt idea and this corrupt group. So eventually, under all this pressure and the Khalifa being unable to change the view of Imam Ahmad and fearing the Imam dying and the retaliation of the Muslims, he released Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. But what happened? Imam Ahmad, through his stance, he safeguarded the creed of the Muslims. He safeguarded the correct viewpoint that the Quran, it's the kalam of Allah, the speech of Allah. It's not the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And eventually, after this Khalifa died, and the other Khalifa came after him, a couple of Khulafa, eventually a Khalifa came along to get rid of this group and stop this whole fitna. And the Muslims accepted that the Quran, the view that the Quran, the proper view that the Quran is the kalam, the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not the creation of Allah. So the point is, at that time, had Imam Ahmad, like all the other ulama, had he buckled under that pressure and under that threat to say the Quran is the creation of Allah, and he was imprisoned and tortured, all the other ulama gave in. But Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, had he buckled under that pressure, then to this day, that creed, that idea, that view, that corruption of that group would have survived in the ummah, and who knows what we would have believed today. But because of the stance of Imam Ahmad, he didn't allow that corrupt idea, that kufr idea, to become normalized and entrenched amongst the Muslims. So he took the stand to the threat to his life and his torture and his imprisonment. but he safeguarded the creed, the belief, the fundamentals of the Muslims. And these are the ulama, these are the inheritors of the prophets. These are the people we will respect. These are the people that will overlook their shortcomings. These are the people today, that are thousands of them, of these ulama today, that are being jailed and tortured because of the stance that they're taking. And so this is what happens when the ulama, if they don't react to the kufr ideas, if they don't take a stand to the kufr ideas, if they allow like these celebrity mashayikh and the celebrity influencers and imams, when they accept secularism and they work under that ideology and they try and push that idea on the Muslims, they try and modernize Islam and reform Islam and bring LGBT into Islam and bring many other problematic views into Islam. This is when these ideas become entrenched in the minds of the Muslims. That's why I say then these kinds of imams, their harms outweigh any good that they are doing. Why? Because the fundamentals of Islam are being changed. And so even if you think they brought you closer to Islam, the Islam that they brought you close to is not actually the proper Islam. The Islam of the Sahaba, the Islam of the Quran and the Sunnah of his Messenger ﷺ. It's a secularized, liberalized, moderate, feminized version of Islam. And this will lead you to destruction in this world and the hereafter. So alhamdulillah, there are brothers like Brother Daniel haqiqatjou and other da'is and other callers that are criticizing these views, that are fighting back against the reform of Islam, against deviant views coming into the minds of the Muslims. And alhamdulillah, there's been a revival in the youth to push back against the liberalization and secularization of Islam. And so these types of celebrity sheikhs and scholars, we say their harm, regardless of the good individually they are doing, their harm far outweighs any good that they are doing. Why? Because they are trying to entrench liberal, secular, feminist ideas amongst the Muslims. They are trying to present a moderate, modern, reformed understanding of Islam that suits the kuffar, that suits the agenda of the Rand Corporation. So this is why we say that these types of ulama, they don't deserve this position. We respect the ulama, but only if you deserve that title. If you don't deserve that title, then you don't deserve that recognition. And if we criticize these views, then we're not attacking the position of ulama in Islam. No, we understand the position of the ulama in Islam. But those are the true ulama. And those true ulama will overlook their mistakes. But the celebrity sheikhs and imams will not overlook their mistakes. Why? Because the mistakes they are making, they are in the fundamental aspects of Islam, and they are changing and deviating and modernizing Islam. So we say, that's why we say these kinds of celebrity scholars, their harms far outweigh their good. But in the end, we accept the position of the true scholars in Islam. We understand who the true scholars are. We will follow the true scholars, and those kinds of scholars that are being jailed, that are being tortured, that are being deplatformed, these scholars still survive in the ummah, but they are not given the attention, they are not giving the funding that these celebrity speakers and influencers are given. But they are still there. We have confidence in our ulama, the true ulama. We have confidence in the revival of the Muslims. And we have confidence in brothers like Daniel haqiqatjou and others like him, that there are Muslims in the ummah that are going to combat and criticize the corrupt ideas, and through them, just like Imam Ahmad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected the creed of the Muslims, through brothers like Daniel, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is protecting the creed of the Muslims and reviving Islam in the Muslims. Jazakumullahu khairan. Brothers and sisters, please like the video and please subscribe to the channel. Please support the channel, inshallah, so that I can continue, inshallah, to provide videos such as this, inshallah.